Corson. I'm located in Connecticut. I specialize in obsessive compulsive disorder and other anxiety disorders.
Hi, I'm Rachel Klechevsky, and I'm in New York. I have a generalized approach where I can work with all kinds of anxiety, depression, and mood disorders, but I also have an additional specialty of sex and relationships with an even bigger specialty of pelvic floor disorder and sexual dysfunction.
And we obviously spoke before this, and I didn't even know about pelvic floor disorder. I never heard about it before.
Yeah, it's not really well known, not even by medical professionals, and that's kind of what made my career evolve into that focus. Actually, seeing a whole lot of anorgasmia, vaginismus, and erectile dysfunction, each of those being disorders where the body is incapable of experiencing sexual pleasure or even functioning sexually. And then, not understanding, what's going on because medical professionals were, unsure what was happening either. And through further research, I was able to really learn how to work with the professionals that could be helpful, that again, were not really well known, like pelvic floor physical therapists, for example.
And I'm sure that still happens to a great degree too.
Yes, a big part of the work that I do is to go around and communicate with medical professionals in particular about pelvic floor physical therapy on a regular basis. I just like proselytize that it exists and that they should utilize that service and refer it to their patients. So I thought what was interesting is that the two of us came to commiserate about how hard it is, to be mental health professionals and, to like provide the care that we want to provide. And then we unintentionally found something interesting that, the two of us come across. So tell us a little bit about, OCD and how you and I could possibly work together, right? How our expertise come together.
So when we started talking, one of the first things that we mentioned was erectile dysfunction. And obviously there are physical reasons why erectile dysfunction happens, but a lot of the people that I have worked with over the years had a genesis of anxiety that led to the erectile dysfunction. So initially what happens is some people will go to a doctor to rule out a physical reason for the erectile dysfunction.
Mm-hmm.
And then if the doctor says, I think it's anxiety related, they'll come see somebody like me. So what we tend to find is rumination is one of the primary reasons that precipitates erectile dysfunction. So rumination, essentially, cyclical pattern of thinking that tends to start with a cognitive distortion. So you start with a cognitive distortion, and then you have a choice, right? I can dispute, or I can reframe this cognitive distortion, or I can reinforce it. And if it's reinforced, every single time that cognitive distortion is revisited, that anxiety that's associated with it grows in strength. So if somebody has a strong emotional reaction to the cognitive distortion, they're probably going to reinforce at a greater rate.
Right. So to clarify, a cognitive distortion, is a belief built upon an experience that then shapes one's entire reality when it doesn't necessarily have to be true. And this is literally the effect of confirmation bias, right? Where you're just looking for the evidence that this belief is accurate, even if it doesn't have to be accurate. And we can change that. So what are the typical processes that you work with to help people challenge their cognitive distortions?
Well, I think the biggest thing is first understanding when it's happening. So people tend to be able to catch cognitive distortions or catch that they're starting to get anxious, but often they'll catch it like 6 or 7 ruminative cycles in. Right. And you can still react at that point, and you can still do something productive and helpful, but it's not going to be as effective as if you caught it in one ruminative cycle, for example. So one of the big things that I work with people on is identifying what their cues are. So Cues for anxiety are basically the signals that your body's sending to say, hey, I'm starting to get stressed out. We got to do something about this.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people will be able to identify, a final cue, like, oh, I know I'm really anxious when tears start streaming down my face. It's like, okay, well, we need to catch it before that, though.
Yeah.
Right. So it could be subtle. It could be, your chest is getting tense. It could be your shoulders. It could be your ears are getting hot. That there's so many different cues that people can have. The very first thing we do is identify what those cues are, right? So that we can usually utilize some sort of mindfulness strategy, deep breathing, grounding techniques, right? Whatever is effective for that person. We also need to identify triggers for anxiety. And when in the case of erectile dysfunction, obviously that's sexual in nature, right? So there might be some, it could be a multitude of things, right? Perceived inadequacy, unrealistic expectations, whatever it might be.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Your clients come to you saying, hey, I'm in therapy for erectile dysfunction, or are they coming to you saying, hey, I have all these other things going on and this is a problem?
so when it comes to erectile dysfunction specifically, that will be usually what I'm sought out for. I'm
Mm-hmm.
having erectile dysfunction. People tell me it could be anxiety. I have no history of anxiety treatment. So, kind of like starting at the beginning.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting when people come to me for their sexual dysfunction, and in particular, cis men, right? So when they have erectile dysfunction, there's so much urgency. They just like want a solution. And
Yes.
it's really, really difficult to say, like, hey, this is something that has been building up for a while, and there is no magic solution to help you. And so, like, relationships are on the line here, which we understand why the urgency is there. And I'm hoping that this conversation kind of tells people that they don't have to wait until something urgent, is happening, that they can get help way before. And that this stuff lives inside of us, through all the messaging that we have. So what do you think is like the biggest barrier for your clients, like when they are going through these ruminations? And again, it's sexual in nature, and we are talking about erectile dysfunction, so we're talking about I'm assuming cis men, right? Not trans women, not right. We're talking specifically about, right, these men who are, engaging with their sexuality with so much anxiety. So tell me a little bit about like what you think the mechanisms are that get in the way for them.
I feel like the one major one is shame. So, you know, shame is one of the most effective ways to reinforce a thought, right? So,
Mhm.
for the most part, thoughts don't differentiate between positive and negative attention. They just like attention. So, if something is causing you intense shame when you think it, you're bound to think it more regularly. So, addressing the shame comes first and foremost. And shame often has, strange manifestations, right? It could be, somebody has ED for the first time and their first thought is, oh my God, I'm gay, right?
Mhm.
And there's so much to unpack there, because the first thing is, okay, are you gay? What does that mean? Right? Is that a bad thing? But also, what evidence do you have for it? And what we'll find is the evidence oftentimes with, obsessions and ruminations like that specifically isn't based on any evidence. It's based on fear and shame.
Mhm. Yeah, in my experience, which is interesting as a woman, right, who's treating men with erectile dysfunction, it's been interesting because I can't generally approach this with evidence, right? I can't approach it with intellect, because often the very things that are creating that sense of shame are a sense of emasculation, right? And so as a woman, I have to be much more delicate discussing this particular kind of shame with my male clients, just in case, right, I'm interacting with that shame cycle.
I hadn't even considered that, honestly. What is that like?
So it's kind of interesting, because again, these men are coming to me in a very vulnerable place. And often, again, the causes of erectile dysfunction are that shame cycle that you were describing. So as a woman, I am often the person that they are embarrassed to have that vulnerability with. And this could be anybody that they are like conceptually attracted to, right? So this doesn't mean that I am like someone that they find attractive, more that I am a woman and they are attracted to women. And so this interacts with like low level sexism and misogyny ideas about, right, their ideas as men in the world. And it's coming forward in, am I man enough? Did I lose my manhood? And so if I am playing in the intellectual game, which is where they thrive, and I am kind of like beating them, right? I'm winning the cognitive cycle. That is further emasculation in that setting. So I need to just kind of approach it in a different way, where I recognize that they are the experts of their own lives and bodies, and kind of go into it from a little bit more of a like femme, like assumed feminine approach. So I go like, let's listen to our bodies, let's find the history, right? Let's look into, right, like let's look into the history of this idea, right? Where did this come from? Tell me more about that. And do you know anybody who's ever struggled with this? Do you talk about it with anyone? And often, of course, they don't, right? They don't talk about it because men are not socialized to have that kind of relationship with other men, right? Women will talk about it, right? If women are having any kind of discomfort with their bodies, they usually have like one other confidant, at least one, where they are sharing this information with. And so men have so much shame that they are hiding it from other men, right? And they have a hard enough time even telling it to their doctors. So I have to be very kind of like, oh wow, that must be so lonely, right? I have to really show them that my interest isn't to emasculate them, but really more to sit with them in that space and give them a new experience around what therapy is, especially if they've never been to therapy before and they're only coming to me because of this particular issue.
Yeah. Um, what would you say you deal mainly with? Do you deal mainly with the anxiety component or the physical component, or is it a mixture of both in your experience?
So I do a mixture of both, because I find that, again, with that sense of urgency, they kind of want a faster solution. Which obviously, like, we can't speed this up, right? We can't speed up a process that's been building up for years, right? There's no magic words. There's no simplicity in here, because it is a complex situation. We are tackling so many things all at once. And so sometimes I say, well, let's see what you are capable of, right? Let's see what your body is able to do. So there are a few tips and tricks that we can try out, things that they can rely on, but it's more for the premise of being curious about their bodies more than actually solving the issue, because nothing is going to solve the issue.
Mm-hmm.
Right? A doctor might prescribe sildenafil, Viagra or Cialis, but that will only go so far. And the body can be dependent on Viagra, right? The body can, not in terms of like opioid addiction, but it can require sildenafil in order to have an erection, whereas there are solutions that don't require it. So there are some things that I would try out, something like recommending, like if they're able to have an erection but not maintain it for very long, there are, rings that are called cock rings, right? That they would put at the base of their penis, or depending on their size, underneath their testicles, which will hold the blood in and keep their erection going. It is not the same as being able to have an erection, and we have to challenge that, right? We have to challenge hey, this is a different thing than what you're used to, but for the purposes of being able to experience sex with your partner, especially if there's urgency, this can work. Again, it's more about being curious. It's more about them wanting to just get back into that curiosity that we have, when our body is going through a change, right? When we're pubescent and our bodies are doing all kinds of things and those hormones are raging, we are curious. We want to see what's interesting. And often that is disrupted by our environment, right? People telling us that what we're doing is wrong or disgusting or making us feel uncomfortable with our bodies. Especially in a setting like the United States, which, kind of built itself upon a premise of sex negativity, of moralizing masturbation. And so when that premise is disrupted, it gets very difficult to think about the idea of being curious about your body as an adult too. And my job is really helping people find a playfulness around this. A playfulness, a curiosity, a desire to try something new, which is also the avenue for shared intimacy in their relationships when they're in them.
One thing that you said that really stood out to me was about Viagra and Cialis. I would say probably 90% of the clients that come to see me have a history of either using Viagra in their early 20s, or using it in the past and trying to sort of get off of it and not use it anymore.
Yeah, that's the thing, right? Like, it feels really good, right? Because what it's doing is it's creating a very firm erection. It is flowing so much blood to the penis that all of the nerves are right at the surface. So it creates a very fun sensation. So people do it for fun, but if they're doing it on a regular basis, yeah, their bodies just get so used to having it that it doesn't learn how to do it itself. It's kind of like hunger, right? If you're eating out of boredom, you're going to get that hunger signal when you're bored, not when you're hungry only, right? And then it's very difficult to know the difference. So, my job would be to help them retrain their bodies to not only get the signal for erection when they're taking the medication, and to attempt it. And it takes a lot of effort, which again is not fun, right? When there's that pressure, when there's all of that stuff that's ruminating, as you had mentioned earlier, on top of that, of, again, if I don't have sex regularly, what kind of man am I? Do I love my body? What's my relationship to my body when it's not working the way that I want it to? What other self-hate ruminations start piling on top of that, and criticisms? How does that affect the rest of their life, right? I see people starting to fail at work because of that lack of confidence that exists when their bodies aren't functioning in the ways that they want them to. And it really kind of spreads, the tentacles kind of spread out into these spaces. And so it is important to get help sooner rather than later. But, again, there are other ways to get that sensation. There are other ways to bring blood into the body where you're not using a medication. So one of my favorite things, and people make lots of jokes about this, but my favorite recommendation is a penis pump. I know that it's they've made jokes about it in Austin Powers and all kinds of dude movies, where they kind of shame men who have them. But at the end of the day, all it does not make your penis larger. Okay, that is not true at all. But what it does is literally the same thing as what Viagra does. It just pumps blood into the penis. And it creates a very sensitive sensation for them because it's doing, again, exactly the same thing.
And it's also taking the shame away.
Mhm.
right? So especially if this is a shared experience between partners as well. But one major component of human expression is intimacy, right? Like this is something that we need. This is something that is vital to our survival as a species, really. So
Absolutely.
so when we aren't able to fully immerse ourselves in intimacy, it's devastating to our mental health. So
Yeah, especially when we relied on a specific script of intimacy. And that's the other thing that I have to do is help them rewrite the script to their circumstances. And that includes their partners. Sometimes I have to bring partners into session. But like anything can happen, right? Especially married people, you took this vow, you said in sickness and in health, you know and so part of that is learning to adjust to what the bodies are doing as we get older, as life gets in the way, right? Like people's sexual dysfunction happens sometimes with grief. Somebody died, somebody got sick, and it may not even be the person who's suffering with the dysfunction. And the other thing is, like, we need to understand that intimacy is not a euphemism for sex. Intimacy is closeness. It's an emotional closeness with another person. It's developed upon this idea where you can be vulnerable with somebody else. And that's very hard to do when you've been socialized your entire life to be strong and to hide and to like push all of this information down. And so when something happens like erectile dysfunction to a person who's not able to communicate their vulnerabilities, they end up communicating really dangerous and harmful things, right? They tend to get very angry or distant or cold. They can do things that doesn't really suit them or help them in any way, shape, or form, but it does make things worse. So yeah, it is important that we recognize that intimacy and a growing loving dynamic, you know, it can be the thing that can be the solution to this very physical issue, right? And it's learning that vulnerability, learning how to be close with oneself, right? It's your relationship with yourself more than it's your relationship with other people, that develops intimacy.
and there's no strength in intimacy without vulnerability and honesty.
I
So
mean, yeah, it's the hugest risk one can take, right? To be vulnerable with another person.
yeah. So when it comes down to it, one of the main things, like you were saying, is removing that layer of shame, doing what you can to identify, okay, what are the thoughts that are leading to this route, right? So if somebody is struggling with ED and their first thought is, oh my God, she's going to leave me, it's probably going to take you right out of that experience. You're no longer connected to your partner. You're stuck in your head at this point.
Absolutely. And once that fear kicks in, your body can't handle like being scared, and right, there's like an evolutionary purpose to that, right?
Yeah.
Like, let's think about this. You're being chased by a woolly mammoth. You're not exactly ready to procreate right now. You need to get out. You need to leave. That fight, flight, freeze, or fawn response, those fear responses that exist, yeah, they exist for a reason. And when you're in those fear responses, your body is not ready to procreate. It's ready to survive.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
So when somebody is regularly stuck in these cycles where they fear this erectile dysfunction is a possibility, the slightest change in sensation can cause that fear response. Now, that sensation could be a completely regular sensation that they're just noticing because they're hypervigilant to that area of the body, right? So now we're overgeneralizing sensations and putting them all together with this experience that's happened in the past, causing more regular erectile dysfunction. That's something that I commonly see as well, too.
Yeah, that reminds me of, when I was learning a little bit about neurotransmitters and how the body kind of like sends those signals. And excitement and anxiety and stress are literally the same hormones.
Hmm.
They're the same exact hormones. It's just a different lens that's placed on that. And so if you have tightness in your stomach, that could be anxiety, but it could also be something that you're excited about. And it could be a little bit of both, right? Excitement is a very vibrating experience, right? And so it is interesting because I do see clients looking at something that, you know, could be potentially really cool and really awesome and approaching it with anxiety. And then I'll have to ask them, hey, that's a sensation in your body. Are you sure it's anxiety, or could it possibly be excitement too? Or one or the other, right? Like, where are we sitting with this? And what does that mean? What are the implications to this big thing that's about to happen? So you're right. Any sensation can be, once we attach fear and anxiety, any sensation can go filter right into that space.
Yeah, that's definitely accurate. What would you say, in your experience, the role of pornography has been?
So I have a love-hate relationship with pornography, right? So one of the things that I push a lot is for having pleasure-centered sex education for young folks. And this is like really controversial to people. I don't know why it's so controversial, because I'm not like telling 3-year-olds to, you know, like watch porn, right? Like that's not the thing. But there is a natural body exploration that exists between every age, right? It is age appropriate. And I think leaning into that and teaching the safest ways to exist with that natural exploration is wonderful. So, you know, I have a lot of parents who have children as young as 5 that they have, you know, caught masturbating, you know, and I say, hey, like, what if you taught them that they have to wash their hands before and after, and that they should do this in a private space, because it's not okay for everybody to participate in their alone time, in their time when they're doing that. You know, also parents should be alert to what is happening. Does it look like a frustrated experience, or does it look like a genuinely like spacing out, enjoying the sensations experience? Because if it's frustrated or urgent, that child might have something going on with them that you need to keep an eye on. And so when it comes to porn ends up being the first, you know, real education anybody's getting about sex, because we don't talk about it. We don't talk about it in any real way. So, you know, you have people who grew up in abstinence only spaces and in purity culture spaces. And then you have people growing up in, at best, comprehensive sex ed, which is very fear oriented. It's like, if you do this, this will happen. You know, there's very little pleasure involved in there. What about like, hey, don't forget to spend the time knowing your own body? You know, take this time where you don't have this pressure to do anything, right? To make a family, to do whatever, to explore what your body looks like, what it feels like when it's touched in certain ways. Get used to your fantasies and ideas about things. We don't talk about that. And it's a shame, because when these things are the strongest and most distracting, these kids are taught to shut it off. And that's going to affect them later in life. So pornography tends to become increasingly more violent and intense. And that's the direction that they're going in, because they're trying to chase those initial sensations because they don't know how to find it themselves. And the fact is, there is something called ethical pornography, and a lot of people think that's softcore. It is not. They have hardcore ethical pornography. The only difference is that the actors actually participate. It is real sex as opposed to edited. And that is a huge difference, right? They don't have fluffers in between the scenes to make it seem like there's an erection lasting for 45 minutes. They're not doing that kind of editing that creates a false idea of what sex is. It is real sex. It is completely consensual. The actors get paid well because they're working. They deserve to get paid. And if somebody doesn't want something, it is part of the scene. That's what's amazing. If somebody says, hey, we need to stop or slow down, I wish we had that discussion. I wish more people knew that that's what sex actually is, where there's room where men can say it too, right? We're always looking at women as the folks that are changing sex, stopping it, or, needing it to slow down. That's not true at all. I wish there were more narratives for men there.
I actually worked with one person who had this intense fear of asking for a break. One time he's telling me, I'm really thirsty. I'm so dehydrated. I can barely breathe. And I was like, how come you didn't get some water? He's like, well, I didn't know how. I didn't know how to ask for a break. Right. So that communication piece is essential.
Right.
Breaks are normal. There's nothing wrong with taking a break.
And necessary, because what's the point of having sex here? Right? Isn't it for pleasure? Right? Like
Yeah.
if we're really thinking about this, most people are not having sex to make babies. Most people are having sex for fun and pleasure and connectivity. And how are you going to do that if you're stressed out? How are you going to do that if you're suffering, if your throat is dry and you can't breathe, or
Right.
if your muscles are on fire because you've been trying too hard, right? Like, how is that going to work? And how connected can you possibly be with another person? And like, what does that do between two people when a person is not taking care of their most basic needs, right? Like the most simple needs.
And what's the fear there, right? Like if I ask for a break, this person is going to think I'm less than, right? That's a pretty irrational fear, I would say.
Yeah, and unfortunately now, because of so much toxic narratives, right? Like so much toxicity in our media about how men are supposed to be with sex in particular, there are women who do that. There are women who feed into that narrative, right?
Hmm.
You're not big enough, you don't have the stamina, you can't do this, what kind of man are you? But that is a reaction also to the way women are objectified in that same media source. None of it is okay. It is highly abusive. And my response to that is, do you really want to be with a person who would treat you that way?
Right.
Right? Ultimately, yeah, if she leaves you because you needed to stop to get a sip of water or to switch positions, and she decided that you're not man enough, is she really somebody you want to spend your day to day with? Is she somebody you want to care about that opinion? Right? Is that an opinion you really want to take in? Where are you putting your power? Right? In other people's opinions or in your own body's needs? Right? These are your choices. And again, this is very much a narrative that I have to hold on to especially when I work with men, because again, logic is not how I'm going to be able to communicate with them. Yeah, I could play the logic game. I can play it better than most people. I have a minor in philosophy, and then right? Like, I can do it. But if I'm trying to help my clients, I need to be there with them, and I need to be in a space with them that makes them feel secure with me. So I can't trigger that space for them. I need to really talk about, where is your power? Where do you want to place it? How do you want to hold it in your body? Where is that pain showing up?
Um, you know, Obviously self-pleasure is another piece of the human experience. But I will say the ever increasing availability of pornography has definitely had a detrimental effect on intimacy.
Yes.
You said that you said that it also gets progressively more aggressive, and the sometimes the content is more taboo, right?
Mm-hmm.
That can lead to changing preferences. So if somebody is regularly engaging with something that started as a curiosity, it might become a prerequisite for, um, sexual attraction or interest. So,
Yeah. We are highly influenced by the media that we are watching. And again, like, pornography is sometimes, like, I can sometimes prescribe pornography to people, right? And By the way, there's a whole part of pornography that a lot of people ignore. There is literotica. There is recorded, right? So only audio. There's a lot of value to the kind of erotica and pornography that is available that is not the easy consumption that like Pornhub and any of those sites that make it so simple and free, by the way, provide for you. And so if we think about it, I love food and sex as like metaphors, right? So if we think about what nourishes our pleasure and what nourishes our sexuality and sense of intimacy, we need to think about low calorie, high calorie, right? I could eat this chocolate bar, but I could also eat this apple. And sometimes I'm in the mood for the chocolate bar, but if I eat the whole bar, what's that going to do for me, right? This apple might give me more nutritionally dense calories, and it will satisfy the sweetness that I'm looking for. And maybe that's where I need to try to put a little bit of effort to nourish my body more, right? So if we think about pornography and the media that we take in that is sexual and erotic, think about what's nourishing you. Is it the easy calorie? Is it the empty, easy calories? Or is it the thing that nourishes you, the thing that really makes you think more, makes you feel more fulfilled, that brings you in tune with your body and with your partner?
And we want to make sure that it doesn't become a compulsive thing either, right? Every single time you're feeling anxious, you go and masturbate, you're probably going to become quite dependent on that.
Absolutely. And I really love that you said that. I think that it's also a really good place to say, hey, this is going to be a whole other topic for next time if you're amenable to this. But the idea of sex addiction and why it's not in the DSM, and how obsessive compulsive disorder treatment is actually more appropriate for out of control sexual behaviors, such as watching porn when anxious or obsessively seeking sex partners, as opposed to an addiction model, and how addiction models are actually really inappropriate to treat those behaviors.
And there's so much great literature on the subject too.
Yes, there is. It's growing and it's much better. When I was trained I like to call it sex school, but I was trained at Widener University in their
sex school.
Yeah, their Center for Human Sexuality Studies. They don't talk about anything related to sex addiction. It is just like not a subject that they touch, because they're like, at the time at least, now they probably do, but when I went there, like they were like, there is no adequate data, and we don't like the idea of using the word addiction when it comes to this. It's really controversial, and it's not the denial of the behaviors and of these, right? I consider them compulsive, right? So it's not the denial of these out of control behaviors. It's the denial that it's an addiction, which is different than an obsessive compulsive issue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it often starts with something ruminating, right? Like there's typically something that precedes it saying, if I don't do this, then, I'm not going to be in a good place, right?
Yes.
If I don't masturbate before my meeting, I'm going to be completely
wound up, and I'm going to fail everything, and they're going to know that I'm terrible. Yeah.
So I definitely agree. Obviously it is an obsession. It is a compulsion, right? And that is different.
Yes. Okay. Well, that's a whole other subject, and I really love that. I really want to do this again with you. We're about 40 minutes in. Do you feel like there's something else you want to discuss on the subject of, OCD and sexuality and erectile dysfunction?
Well, I would say that when it comes down to it, the genesis tends to be rumination. If you have specifically OCD, that means this is taking up at least an hour of your day. So it can be way more than an hour of your day. It could be, 15 hours of your day. It could be completely taking over in that sense. Mm-hmm. It tends to fall in 4 different categories. And those categories are fear of germs, right? So you could be ruminating about this fear of germs causing increased anxiety and the need for some sort of compulsion. And there's an often misunderstanding too. There's something called pure OCD, which manifests differently than traditional OCD with standard compulsions. These compulsions tend to be completely mental. So it'll be like you have this obsession about germs, and then you need to play the script in your head every single time you have this exposure to whatever germ, right? And that can cause a lot of distress. Another topic is doubt, right? Like having doubt in your abilities, having a doubt in who you are as an individual. There's orderliness fixations, which is just the need for things to be a very specific, organized way, orderly way. And then there's taboo obsessions. And taboo tends to manifest in, oh God, I had this thought. Am I a pedophile? Right? I had this thought. Am I gay? I had this thought. Do I want to hurt people? And being able to identify a thought is just a thought is a crucial component of overcoming these anxiety-provoking thoughts that are leading to real physical manifestations, including erectile dysfunction.
Absolutely. My favorite aspect of acceptance and commitment therapy is the diffusion. And the
Yes,
first
absolutely.
diffusion is I have a thought that, and if that kind of does not work for you, is to sing the thought in a ridiculous song like Pop Goes the Weasel to kind of like minimize it and make it small and dismiss it. And I found that to be the most adorable way of approaching these like really powerful, ruminations, right? These things that people have been carrying with them and evolving them, right, over the years, right? Where it started with something small and then it evolves to something huge. And then when you take that like really big scary thought that you have in your mind and you sing it to the song of Pop Goes the Weasel, it kind of makes it a fun game of like, what else can I make smaller?
And it's honestly, and I'm sure you've had the same experience, being able to work with a client that has this thought that is so debilitating and fear and anxiety provoking and fear inducing, right? Being able to take any of that power away, being able to express that thought and have the client laugh about it, that's a really powerful moment.
It's so fun too.
Yeah.
Yeah, like humor is definitely my vibe in sessions, but like you got to be careful when you're using it, right? There's an art to the use of humor in session. But yeah, like watching them starting to find the humor in what had caused them so much pain is just a brilliant moment in time, and you giving them permission to laugh at it, right? Because that's half our job, is just permission, is like, hey, you're allowed to do this, like we're here, it's between you and me. And it gets really interesting after that. After the first one, it gets really fun to watch everything else just kind of start to crumble.